The blood on Emma Wright's hands wasn't hers. And that was the worst part about working in the saloon's kitchen, where the butcher left his deliveries without warning, and the meat hooks swung like gallows in the early morning light. She wiped her palms on the apron that hung loose around her frame, the ties wrapped twice around her waist, because nothing in this world seemed made for a woman shaped like her. All sharp angles and boyish lines in a place that valued curves and softness. Eagle Pass, Texas in the summer of 1883 was hotter than Satan's breath, and Emma had learned to keep her head down, her hands busy, and her dreams locked away where they couldn't hurt her anymore. The kitchen door swung open, bringing with it the smell of whiskey and tobacco from the main room where men gathered to forget their troubles or create new ones. Martha, the saloon owner, stepped inside with her usual expression of mild disappointment, the one she wore whenever she looked at Emma. "The dresses I ordered for you came in," she said, holding up a bundle of dark fabric. "Try this one on. Can't have you serving drinks looking like a scarecrow." Emma took the dress without meeting Martha's eyes, already knowing what would happen. In the small room behind the kitchen where she slept on a cot barely wide enough for her body, she struggled into the garment. The bodice gaped at her chest, the waist sat somewhere around her ribs, and the sleeves cut into her shoulders while hanging loose around her arms. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and saw what she always saw. A girl playing dress-up in her mother's clothes, except her mother had been dead for 6 years, and there was no one left to tell her she looked pretty anyway. "It doesn't fit," Emma called out, her voice flat with the resignation of someone who had stopped being surprised by disappointment. Martha appeared in the doorway, assessed the situation with a quick glance, and sighed. "Take it off. You can wear your regular clothes for now." "But Emma, I need you to understand that the other girls bring in twice what you do, because men want to look at something pleasing while they drink. That's just the way of things." Emma changed back into her worn cotton shirt and patched skirt, the ones that at least stayed on her body even if they hung like sackcloth. She'd never owned a dress that fit. Not when her mother was alive and sewing for other people's daughters, always too busy to measure Emma properly. Not when she'd been passed between reluctant relatives after her parents died of the fever. Not in the 2 years she'd been working at Martha's saloon, trying to save enough money to maybe, someday, have a life that belonged to her. The morning stretched into afternoon as it always did, with Emma hauling water from the well, scrubbing pots, and preparing the evening meal for the saloon. She had a way with food that Martha appreciated, even if she didn't appreciate much else about her. Emma could take the toughest cut of beef and make it tender, could stretch a handful of vegetables into a stew that satisfied a dozen hungry men. It was a talent born of necessity, from years of making do with whatever was available. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, when Emma took the kitchen scraps out to the waste barrel behind the saloon. She was wiping her hands on her apron when she noticed the man standing near the hitching post, his attention fixed on something in the distance. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty shirt, and a hat that cast his face in shadow. Something about the way he stood, perfectly still like he was part of the landscape itself, made Emma pause. She shouldn't have stared. She knew better than to draw attention to herself, especially from men who looked like they could handle themselves in a fight or anywhere else life took them. But there was something about him that held her there for a moment too long, and when he turned his head, she found herself looking directly into eyes the color of a summer storm. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so brief she might have imagined it, and then he was walking into the saloon through the front doors. Emma hurried back to the kitchen, her heart beating faster than it should have been, annoyed with herself for acting like some foolish girl who'd never seen a cowboy before. Eagle Pass was full of them, men passing through on their way to somewhere else, and she'd learned not to wonder about their stories. The evening rush began as it always did, with Emma moving between the kitchen and the main room, carrying plates of food, and trying to avoid the hands that sometimes reached for her. The other girls who worked for Martha, the ones with the right dresses and the right figures, knew how to turn those touches into coins. Emma just knew how to duck and keep moving. She was setting a plate in front of old Pete Harrison, who came in every Thursday like clockwork, when she felt someone watching her. She glanced up and saw the stranger from outside seated at a corner table, his hat now resting on the chair beside him. He had dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had seen its share of weather and trouble. He wasn't looking at her the way men usually looked at the women in the saloon. He was looking at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to figure out. Emma turned away and headed back to the kitchen, but she could feel his gaze following her. It made her self-conscious in a way she wasn't used to, made her aware of how her skirt dragged on the floor because it was too long, how her shirt gaped at the collar because she'd lost the top button weeks ago. She focused on her work, on the familiar rhythm of cooking and serving, and tried to forget about storm-colored eyes. Later, when the crowd had thinned and Emma was wiping down tables, Martha approached her with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. "The man at the corner table asked about you," she said, keeping her voice low, Emma's hands stilled on the table. "What did he want to know? Your name, how long you'd been working here, whether you had family." Martha studied her face. "I told him your name was Emma Wright and the rest was your business to share or not. He didn't push, just nodded and thanked me. Then he ordered another whiskey." Emma risked a glance toward the corner table, but it was empty now. "Did he leave? Few minutes ago. Left a generous tip, too." Martha paused, then added, "Be careful, Emma. Men like that, the quiet ones who watch instead of grabbing, they're either the best kind or the most dangerous kind. Hard to tell which until it's too late." That night, lying on her cot in the small room with moonlight filtering through the single window, Emma thought about what Martha had said. She'd been taking care of herself for long enough to know that hope was more dangerous than any cowboy could ever be. Hope made you careless. Hope made you believe in things that weren't real. She turned on her side and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come and take her away from the strange restlessness that had settled in her chest. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn as always and made her way to the kitchen to start the fire for breakfast. She was reaching for the woodpile when she noticed something on the back step, a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Her first thought was that Martha had ordered more supplies, but Martha always had things delivered to the front entrance. Emma picked up the package, surprised by its lightness, and carried it inside. She set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment before untying the string. The paper fell away to reveal fabric, but not like any fabric she usually saw. This was fine cotton in a soft blue color, neatly folded. With trembling hands, Emma shook out the garment and felt her breath catch. It was a dress. A simple dress, nothing fancy, but beautifully made with careful stitching and attention to detail. The bodice looked like it might actually fit her narrow frame, and the waist was placed where a waist should be. She held it up against herself and noticed something tucked into the folds, a small piece of paper with neat handwriting that read, "Every woman deserves to wear something made just for her." There was no signature, no indication of who had left it. Emma's mind immediately went to the stranger from the night before, but that seemed impossible. Why would someone she'd never even spoken to leave her a gift? And how would he have known her measurements? She looked at the dress again, at the way the seams were reinforced and the hem was perfectly straight, and felt something crack open inside her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. She knew she should bring it to Martha, should ask if anyone had been around the saloon that morning. Instead, she took the dress to her small room and laid it carefully on her cot. She had work to do, breakfast to prepare, and a long day ahead. The dress could wait. But all morning, as she cooked and cleaned, she found her thoughts returning to that small room and the blue fabric that represented something she couldn't quite name. It was afternoon before Emma allowed herself to try on the dress. She closed the door to her room, undressed quickly, and slipped the garment over her head. The fabric settled against her skin like it had been waiting for her, and when she fastened the buttons, they aligned perfectly. The bodice fit her flat chest without gaping, the waist cinched at exactly the right place, and the sleeves hugged her arms without cutting or hanging loose. She turned to face the cracked mirror and barely recognized the person looking back at her. She looked like a woman. Not a girl playing dress-up, not a scarecrow in borrowed clothes, but an actual woman with a shape and form that made sense. The blue brought out something in her eyes she'd never noticed before, made her pale skin look less like sickness and more like cream. Emma stood there for a long time, just looking at herself, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes for reasons she couldn't fully explain. A knock on the door broke the spell. "Emma, you in there?" Martha's voice carried through the thin wood. Emma wiped her eyes quickly. "Yes, just changing. I'll be right out. When you have a minute, come see me. Something I need to discuss with you." Emma changed back into her regular clothes, folding the blue dress with reverent care and tucking it under her pillow where it would be safe. She found Martha in the saloon's main room, sweeping the floor in the afternoon lull before evening customers arrived. Martha looked up as Emma approached, then set her broom aside. "I saw that package on the back step this morning before you came in. I was going to bring it inside, but then I heard you moving around and figured you'd find it, so I waited to see if you'd tell me about it." Emma felt her cheeks warm. It was a dress. Someone left me a dress. Someone being that cowboy from last night, I'd wager. Martha's expression softened slightly. "Let me tell you what I know about him, which isn't much. His name is Lucas Foster. He's been working on the Campbell Ranch about 10 miles north of here for the past 3 months. Keeps to himself mostly, but the ranch hands who come and say he's a hard worker and handles horses better than anyone they've seen. He's not married, not engaged, and not the type to frequent the upstairs rooms, if you understand my meaning." Emma absorbed this information, trying to match it with the man she'd barely seen. "Why would he leave me a dress? That's a question you'll have to ask him yourself." Martha picked up her broom again. "He comes in most Thursday evenings. If I was you, I'd wear that dress next time. Let him see what his gift looks like on the person he gave it to." The week that followed was the longest of Emma's life. She went through her daily routines in a haze of anticipation and anxiety. One moment convinced she should return the dress, the next moment imagining what she might say to Lucas Foster when she saw him again. She took the dress out each night and held it against herself in the mirror, still marveling at how something as simple as properly fitting clothes could change the way she saw herself. Thursday arrived with clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain that Eagle Pass desperately needed. Emma spent extra time getting ready that evening, washing her hair in the basin and braiding it carefully before pinning it up. She put on the blue dress and studied herself in the mirror, trying to see what Lucas Foster had seen that made him want to do this for her. The evening started slowly, with just a handful of regulars trickling in. Emma served drinks and food, hyper-aware of every person who walked through the door, her heart jumping each time until she saw it wasn't him. By 9 o'clock, she'd convinced herself he wasn't coming. Maybe he'd moved on from the Campbell ranch. Maybe he'd forgotten about her entirely. Maybe leaving the dress had been some kind of strange impulse he now regretted. She was carrying a tray of empty glasses back to the kitchen when the door opened, and Lucas Foster walked in. He was wearing a clean shirt this time, his hair still damp like he'd washed up recently, and when he removed his hat, his eyes immediately found her across the room. Emma froze in place, the tray suddenly heavy in her hands as something passed between them that she felt all the way to her bones. He crossed the room slowly, his boots making soft sounds on the wooden floor, and stopped a respectful distance from her. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't just gray but had flecks of blue in them, and there was a small scar on his chin that gave his face character. "Evening, Miss Wright," he said, his voice low and careful. "I hope I'm not being too forward, but I wanted to see if the dress fit properly." Emma found her voice, though it came out softer than she intended. "How did you know my measurements?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I worked in a tailor shop for 2 years before I came to Texas. Learned to gauge sizes by looking at how a person carries themselves. I hope you don't mind the presumption. I just thought." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I thought you deserved to have something that was made for you." "Why?" The question came out before Emma could stop it. "You don't know me. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Lucas met her eyes steadily. "Because I know what it's like to feel like you don't quite fit anywhere. And because the first time I saw you, walking out that back door with your head held high even though your clothes didn't fit right, and you looked tired enough to drop, I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Figured a woman like that deserved to know it." Emma felt the world tilt slightly. No one had ever called her beautiful before. "I should get back to work," she managed to say, though her feet didn't move. "Of course. I'll just take my usual table if that's all right." He stepped back, giving her space. "Maybe later, if you have time, you'd sit with me for a minute. I'd like to talk to you properly. No pressure, though. If you'd rather not, I understand." She should say no. She should protect herself from whatever this was, this strange connection that felt too big and too fast. Instead, she heard herself say, "I get a break around 10. I could sit for a few minutes." His smile was like sunrise, warm and genuine. "I'll be here." The next hour passed in a blur of activity that Emma barely registered. She was conscious of Lucas at his corner table, nursing a single whiskey and occasionally speaking with other ranch hands who stopped by to greet him. She noticed how respectful they seemed, how they treated him like someone worth knowing rather than just another drifter. When 10 o'clock came, Martha caught her eye and nodded toward the table, a gesture of permission that Emma was grateful for. She approached with her heart hammering in her chest, and Lucas stood immediately, pulling out a chair for her before sitting back down. This close, she could smell soap and leather and something else, something that was just him. "Thank you for the dress," she said, her hands folded in her lap. "It's the nicest thing anyone's ever given me." "You're welcome. Though to be honest, I should tell you there are 2 more. He said it casually, but Emma saw the slight tension in his shoulders, like he was worried he'd overstepped. "I had a friend who's good with a needle make them for me. Well, for you. Different colors, different styles. I left them at the boarding house where I'm staying because I didn't want to overwhelm you with all 3 at once." Emma stared at him. "You had 3 dresses made for me. Why would you do that?" Lucas leaned forward, his expression serious. "Can I be honest with you, Miss Wright?" "Really honest, even though we just met, and this might sound like the ramblings of a crazy man." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I came to Eagle Pass 3 months ago because I was running from some trouble up in Kansas. Nothing illegal," he added quickly. "Just personal trouble, the kind that comes from expecting one thing from life and getting another. I took the job at the Campbell Ranch thinking I'd work for a season, save some money, and move on like I always do. Then I came into this saloon a few weeks back and saw you carrying plates like they weighed nothing, dodging drunk men with the grace of a dancer, and looking like you were 1,000 miles away in your head. I came back the next week, and the week after that, just to see you. And every time I came, I noticed your clothes didn't fit right, and I saw how the other girls here made more tips just because they wore nice dresses, and it made me angry. He paused, running a hand through his hair. Not at you, at the unfairness of it. You work just as hard, maybe harder, but you don't get the same rewards because of something as simple as clothing. So I asked Martha about you, found out your name and that you didn't have family. Then I wrote to my friend in San Antonio, the one who does tailoring, and described you as best I could. She made the 3 dresses and sent them to me last week. I've been carrying them around trying to work up the courage to leave one for you. Emma didn't know what to say. The story was so unexpected, so far from anything she'd imagined, that it felt like something from one of the dime novels she sometimes found left behind in the saloon. You did all that for someone you've never talked to. I know it sounds strange. Maybe it is strange. But Miss Wright, I've been a lot of places and met a lot of people, and I've never once felt compelled to stay anywhere or know anyone the way I want to stay here and know you. If that makes you uncomfortable, tell me now and I'll leave you alone. But if there's any part of you that might want to get to know me too, I'd be grateful for the chance. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, and saw sincerity in every line of his face. She thought about the dress under her pillow, about how it had felt to see herself as something other than a girl who didn't quite fit. She thought about how lonely she'd been for so long, how she'd convinced herself that being alone was safer than hoping for anything else. And then she thought about how this man, this stranger who wasn't quite a stranger anymore, had seen her and decided she was worth something. I'd like to get to know you too, she said quietly. But I don't know how. I've never done this before. Lucas's smile was gentle. Neither have I, not really. How about we start simple? Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with this saloon or Eagle Pass. Emma thought for a moment. I used to draw when I was younger. My mother would save scraps of paper for me, and I'd draw pictures of places I'd never been. Mountains and oceans and big cities with buildings tall as trees. I haven't drawn anything in years, but sometimes I still see pictures in my head. What would you draw now if you had paper and pencil? Lucas asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. The sky at sunset. The way it looked today, all purple and gold with those clouds coming in from the west. It reminded me of a bruise healing, going from something dark to something beautiful. She felt self-conscious as soon as the words left her mouth. That probably sounds silly. It sounds like poetry, Lucas said softly. My turn. Something about me. I can't read very well. I know my letters and I can work through a newspaper if I have time, but I never had much schooling. That's why I learned trades instead, working with my hands. Horses understand me better than most people do. They talked until Martha came over and gently reminded Emma that her break was over. Lucas stood when she did, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the air between them charged with possibility. Can I see you again? He asked. Not here, somewhere else. Maybe Sunday afternoon if you have time off. Emma knew that Martha gave her Sunday afternoons free, the only break she got all week. She usually spent them sleeping or washing her few clothes, but the thought of spending that time with Lucas made her pulse quicken. I'd like that. Where? There's a creek about a mile south of town, has some cottonwood trees that give good shade. I could meet you there, maybe bring some lunch. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. All right, Emma agreed, and then before she could think better of it, she reached out and touched his hand briefly. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." His fingers closed around hers for just a moment, warm and calloused and solid. "No need to thank me, Emma. This is as much for me as it is for you." The next 3 days dragged by with agonizing slowness. Emma worked her shifts in a daze, her mind constantly wandering to Sunday afternoon and what it might bring. She tried on the blue dress several more times, wanting to wear it when she met Lucas but also wanting to save it for something special. In the end, she decided to wear it, reasoning that seeing Lucas again was special enough. Friday night brought unexpected complications. A group of rowdy cowboys came in already half drunk, looking for trouble and finding it in the form of old Pete Harrison, who they accused of cheating at cards. A fight broke out that spilled across the main room, and Emma found herself caught in the middle when one of the men stumbled into her, sending her crashing into a table. She landed hard on her hip and shoulder, pain shooting through her body, and didn't see the man raising his fist until Lucas was suddenly there, stepping between them. "That's enough," Lucas said, his voice carrying a note of authority that cut through the chaos. "The lady didn't do anything to you. Apologize and walk away, or we can take this outside and settle it properly." The drunk cowboy took a swing at Lucas, who dodged easily and caught the man's arm, twisting it behind his back in a move so smooth it looked practiced. "I said apologize to the lady." "Sorry," the man mumbled, all the fight gone out of him. Lucas released him and turned to Emma, his expression shifting from hard to concerned in an instant. "Are you hurt? Can you stand?" Emma let him help her up, wincing at the pain in her hip. "I'm all right, thank you." Martha had restored order by then, with the help of some more sober patrons, and the troublemakers were being escorted out. She came over to Emma and Lucas, her face tight with worry. "Emma, you're done for the night. Go lie down and let me know if you need the doctor." "Lucas, thank you for stepping in. First round's on the house." Lucas shook his head. "No need, Martha, just glad I could help." He turned back to Emma. "Let me walk you to your room, make sure you get there safely." She wanted to protest that she could manage on her own, but her hip was throbbing and her hands were shaking with delayed shock. She let Lucas guide her through the kitchen to the small room beyond, his hand gentle on her elbow. At the door, she turned to face him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I've dealt with drunk men before. I know you have. But I was there and I couldn't just stand by and watch." He studied her face in the dim light. "Are you sure you're all right? That was a hard fall. I'll have some bruises, but nothing serious." Emma managed a weak smile. "Seems like you're making a habit of taking care of me. Can't think of a better habit to have." Lucas reached out like he wanted to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and dropped his hand. "I should let you rest." "But Emma, if you're too sore on Sunday, if you need to postpone our meeting, just send word to the Campbell Ranch. Don't push yourself on my account." "I'll be there," Emma said firmly. "A few bruises won't stop me." After he left, Emma lay on her cot in the blue dress she'd been too tired to change out of, and thought about how it had felt to have Lucas stand up for her. She'd spent so long taking care of herself, expecting nothing from anyone, that having someone act like her safety mattered felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Saturday brought aching muscles and purple bruises blooming across her hip and shoulder. But Emma worked through it with the determination of someone who'd never had the luxury of taking a day off. The other girls whispered about what had happened, about how Lucas Foster had defended her, and Emma caught them looking at her with new interest, like she'd suddenly become someone worth noticing. Sunday morning, Emma woke before dawn despite having the day off, too nervous and excited to sleep. She washed carefully, braided her hair again, and put on the blue dress with trembling fingers. She had no mirror to check her full appearance, but she felt pretty, and that was a novel enough sensation that she held on to it as she slipped out of the saloon in the early afternoon. The walk to the creek took longer than she'd expected, especially with her injured hip still tender. But the day was beautiful with a light breeze that kept the worst of the heat at bay. Emma followed the path Lucas had described, and as she rounded a bend in the trail, she saw him waiting under the cottonwood trees exactly as promised. He stood when he saw her, and his face lit up in a way that made Emma's breath catch. "You came," he said, like he'd been worried she wouldn't. "I said I would." She joined him in the shade, noticing the blanket he'd spread on the ground and the basket beside it. "You really did bring lunch. Told you I would." He gestured for her to sit, then settled beside her with a careful distance between them. "How are you feeling?" "Your hip's still bothering you. A little, but nothing I can't handle." Emma watched as he unpacked the basket, revealing bread, cheese, some cold chicken, and a jar of what looked like lemonade. "Did you make all this?" "I wish I could take credit, but Mrs. Campbell packed it when I told her I was having a picnic with a lady. She was so excited she nearly packed enough food for a small army." Lucas handed Emma a plate. "She made me promise to tell her all about you later. I hope that's all right." They ate and talked, the conversation flowing more easily than Emma had expected. Lucas told her about growing up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith who died when Lucas was 15, forcing him to find work wherever he could. He'd been a stable hand, a ranch worker, a deputy for a brief stint that hadn't suited him, and finally a horse trainer, which he loved. Emma shared what she remembered of her childhood, the happy parts before her parents died, and the less happy parts that came after. "What made you come to Texas?" Emma asked, finishing her lemonade. Lucas was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the creek water flowing past. "I was engaged to a woman in Kansas. Sarah was her name. We'd been planning a wedding for months, had everything arranged, and then 2 weeks before we were supposed to marry, she told me she'd changed her mind. Said she'd realized she didn't love me enough to spend her whole life with me. Said it wouldn't be fair to either of us to go through with it." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "That must have hurt terribly." "It did at the time. Now I think she did us both a favor. She was honest enough to stop something that wasn't right before it was too late. I just needed to get away for a while, start over somewhere new." He turned to look at Emma. "I'm glad I came here. If I hadn't, I never would have met you." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You barely know me. Maybe once you do, you'll realize I'm not what you thought. Maybe you should let me decide that." Lucas reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Emma, I know this is fast. I know we've only really talked twice. But I also know that I think about you all the time. That seeing you in that dress makes me feel like I did something right for the first time in a long while, and that I want to keep seeing you, keep talking to you, and find out if this feeling I have means what I think it means." Emma looked down at their joined hands, at how perfectly his seemed to engulf hers. "What feeling is that? Like I've been waiting for you without knowing it. Like everything that happened before was just leading me here to this moment to you." He squeezed her hand gently. "Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me you feel something too, even if it's small." She met his eyes and decided to be as honest as he'd been. "It's not small. It's big and scary, and I don't know what to do with it. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Lucas smiled, that sunrise smile that made Emma's heart flutter. "Then how about we figure it out together? No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads." "I'd like that," Emma said, and meant it with every part of her being. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and laughing and occasionally falling into comfortable silences. Lucas told her about the horses he was training at the Campbell ranch, how each one had its own personality and quirks. Emma told him about her dreams of having a little house someday, maybe with a garden where she could grow vegetables and flowers. Neither of them mentioned the future beyond those vague dreams, but the possibility of it hung in the air between them, sweet and tantalizing. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Lucas walked Emma back toward town, carrying the empty basket and moving at a slow pace that accommodated her injured hip. At the edge of Eagle Pass, where anyone might see them, he stopped. "I want to give you the other 2 dresses," he said. "I don't want you to think that's all I'm interested in, dressing you up like a doll, but I made a promise to myself that you'd have them, and I keep my promises." "I know that's not all you're interested in," Emma assured him, "and I'd be grateful for the dresses. When can I see you again?" "Thursday at the saloon, and maybe next Sunday if you'll meet me again." The hope in his voice was so naked that Emma wanted to hug him. Yes to both. She hesitated, then stood on her toes and kissed his cheek quickly, her lips barely brushing his skin. "Thank you for today. It was perfect." Lucas touched his cheek where she'd kissed him, looking stunned and pleased. "The pleasure was all mine, Emma Wright. I'll see you Thursday." Emma walked back to the saloon feeling like she was floating, her bruises forgotten in the warm glow of happiness that suffused her entire body. When she entered through the back door, Martha was waiting in the kitchen with her arms crossed and an expression that might have been stern if not for the slight smile tugging at her lips. "Have a good afternoon?" Martha asked, though the answer was clearly written all over Emma's face. "The best afternoon of my life," Emma admitted. Martha's smile widened. "Good. You deserve some happiness, girl. Lord knows you've worked hard enough for it. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be busy and I need you sharp." That night, Emma lay in bed and replayed every moment of the afternoon in her mind, from the way Lucas had smiled when she arrived to the feeling of his hand in hers. She thought about what he'd said, about feeling like everything had led him to her, and realized she felt the same way. All the hardship, all the years of not fitting in or feeling like she belonged anywhere, suddenly made sense if they'd brought her to this moment. The week that followed was the happiest Emma had known in years. She wore the blue dress to work on Monday, and the regulars noticed immediately, complimenting her and leaving better tips than usual. Martha noticed too, giving Emma more shifts serving in the main room rather than stuck in the kitchen. The other girls were less enthusiastic, but Emma was too content to care about their jealousy. Tuesday brought a surprise when a young man arrived at the saloon asking for Emma Wright. He carried a package and a note from Lucas that read, "As promised, I hope these fit as well as the first. Yours, Lucas Foster." Inside were 2 more dresses, one in a soft green that reminded Emma of spring grass, and another in cream with tiny flowers embroidered around the collar. Both fit perfectly, and Emma spent the evening trying them on and marveling at how different she felt in properly fitted clothes. Wednesday dragged by with agonizing slowness as Emma counted down the hours until she'd see Lucas again. She chose the green dress for Thursday, wanting him to see her in something new, and braided her hair with extra care. When evening came and Lucas walked through the door, the look on his face told her she'd made the right choice. They fell into a pattern over the next few weeks. Lucas came to the saloon every Thursday evening, spending a few hours at his usual table and talking with Emma during her breaks. On Sunday afternoons, they met at the creek, bringing food and conversation and slowly learning everything about each other. Emma discovered that Lucas had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he could identify birds by their calls, and that he had strong opinions about the best way to train a horse. Lucas learned that Emma was smarter than her limited education suggested, that she had a memory for details that bordered on remarkable. and that she sang softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. One Sunday in early September, as they sat by the creek with Emma's head resting on Lucas's shoulder, he asked the question that had been building between them for weeks. "Emma, I need to know something. Where do you see this going? Us, I mean." Emma lifted her head to look at him. "What do you want it to be?" "I want to marry you," Lucas said simply. "I've wanted that since probably the second time we talked. But I know it's fast, and I know you might not be ready for that kind of commitment. So I'm asking what you want, not what you think I want to hear." Emma's heart was racing, but she made herself think carefully before responding. "I want that too. But Lucas, I have to be honest with you. I don't have anything to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no land, no family connections. Just myself and the money I've saved from working, which isn't much. And I'm not sure I'd be a very good wife. I don't know how to do most of the things women are supposed to know." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious. "Emma, listen to me. I don't care about dowries or connections. I care about you, about the woman who works harder than anyone I've ever met, who's kind even when the world hasn't been kind to her, who lights up when she talks about growing vegetables like it's the most exciting thing imaginable. That's what I want. That's all I want. As for being a good wife, we'll figure it out together. I'm probably not going to be a perfect husband either, but I'll try my best every single day and I'll never stop trying." "Yes," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Lucas kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Emma's first real kiss, and it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been, but had always been searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling so wide it almost hurt. "I should ask Martha for her blessing," Lucas said. "She's the closest thing you have to family here. And I need to talk to Mr. Campbell about possibly buying some land near the ranch, somewhere we could build a house. Would you be all right living outside town? It might be lonely sometimes." "I've been lonely in the middle of town," Emma pointed out. "At least out there I'd have you." They made plans in whispers and stolen kisses, talking about the future with the eagerness of people who'd finally found something worth planning for. Lucas would approach Martha and Mr. Campbell that week. If all went well, they could be married within a month, as soon as Lucas had secured a small plot of land and built a basic cabin to live in. It wouldn't be much at first, but it would be theirs. When Lucas spoke to Martha the next day, he found her surprisingly emotional. "I always hoped Emma would find someone who saw what I saw in her," Martha said, wiping her eyes. "She's a good girl who never got a fair shake. You treat her right, Lucas Foster, or you'll have me to answer to." "Yes, madam," Lucas promised. "I intend to spend the rest of my life treating her exactly right." Mr. Campbell was equally supportive, offering Lucas a 5-acre parcel on the edge of the ranch property at a price Lucas could afford. "You're a good worker, and you're good with the horses," Campbell said. "I'd hate to lose you entirely, but I understand a man wanting his own place. Tell you what, you keep training my horses and I'll pay you fair wages for it. That way you'll have steady income while you get your feet under you." Everything was falling into place faster than Emma had dared to hope. Lucas spent his spare time building a small cabin on the land, working late into the evenings with help from some of the other ranch hands. Emma gave Martha notice that she'd be leaving the saloon, and while Martha was sorry to lose her, she was also genuinely happy for Emma's good fortune. The wedding was planned for the first Sunday in October, to be held in the small church at the edge of Eagle Pass with Martha standing up for Emma, and one of Lucas's friends from the ranch standing up for him. Emma wore the cream-colored dress with the embroidered flowers, and Lucas wore a new suit he'd bought special for the occasion. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Emma felt a joy so intense it was almost painful. The small gathering of friends celebrated at the saloon that evening, with Martha providing food and drinks free of charge. Emma danced with Lucas, her head resting against his chest as he swayed them gently to the music from an old piano in the corner. "Happy, Mrs. Foster," he murmured into her hair. "Happier than I knew was possible," Emma replied honestly. They spent their wedding night in the new cabin, which was barely furnished but felt like a palace to Emma. Lucas had managed to build a sturdy bed frame, a table with 2 chairs and some shelves for storage. There were curtains on the windows that Martha had donated, and a wood stove for cooking and heat. It was simple and rough around the edges, but it was home. Emma was nervous about the physical aspects of marriage, having only a vague idea of what to expect, but Lucas was patient and gentle, taking his time and making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Emma marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few months. She'd gone from a girl who felt like she didn't fit anywhere to a woman who'd found exactly where she belonged. The first months of marriage brought adjustments and challenges. Emma learned how to manage a household on limited resources, growing skilled at stretching their modest budget to cover necessities. She planted a fall garden with vegetables that could withstand the cooler weather, and was thrilled when shoots began to emerge from the soil. Lucas continued training horses for Mr. Campbell, his reputation spreading as word got out about his skills. Other ranchers began bringing their problem horses to him, and the additional income made their life a little easier. They settled into comfortable routines. Emma would wake before dawn to make breakfast, seeing Lucas off to work before tackling her own chores: washing, mending, cooking, and tending the garden. Lucas would return in the evenings tired and dirty, but always happy to see her, his face lighting up when he came through the door. They'd eat dinner together, talking about their days, and then sit on the small porch Lucas had added to the cabin, watching the sun set over the Texas plains. Winter came with cold winds and occasional frost, but the cabin stayed warm with the stove burning and thick quilts on the bed. Emma and Lucas spent long evenings by firelight, with Emma teaching Lucas to read better and Lucas teaching Emma about horses and ranching. They learned each other's moods and habits, the small intimacies that came with sharing a life. In January, Emma realized she'd missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress or the change in her circumstances, but when a second month passed with no sign of them, she began to suspect the truth. Martha, when Emma confided in her during a rare trip to town, confirmed her suspicions with an experienced eye. "You're carrying a baby, no doubt about it," she said with a grin. "How do you feel about that?" Emma's emotions were complicated. She was excited and terrified in equal measure, worried about all the things that could go wrong, but also thrilled at the thought of giving Lucas a child. "I don't know the first thing about being a mother," she admitted. "You'll learn, same as you learned everything else," Martha said practically. "And you've got time to figure it out. When are you planning to tell Lucas? Tonight, I think. I'm not sure how he'll react." But when Emma told Lucas that evening, his reaction left no room for doubt. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, before setting her down carefully like she might break. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're really having a baby." "We really are," Emma confirmed, her own happiness bubbling up at his reaction. "Probably sometime in late summer." Lucas became even more protective and attentive than usual, insisting that Emma rest more and taking on extra chores to spare her the heavy work. Emma found it endearing and slightly frustrating, wanting to pull her own weight, but she couldn't deny that she got tired more easily as the pregnancy progressed. Her body changed in ways that fascinated and frightened her belly swelling with new life. Spring brought wildflowers blooming across the plains, and Emma's garden coming to life with vegetables that promised a good harvest. Lucas expanded the cabin, adding a second room for the baby and reinforcing the structure to make it sturdier. He built a cradle from cottonwood, sanding it smooth and carving Emma's initials into the headboard. Emma sewed tiny clothes from fabric scraps Martha donated, her stitches careful, and even preparing for a baby she couldn't wait to meet. In late August, on a day so hot the air shimmered, Emma went into labor. Lucas rode like fury to fetch Martha, who'd agreed to serve as midwife, and then paced outside the cabin for hours while Emma labored and Martha coached her through it. When the baby finally came with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world, Lucas burst back into the cabin to find Emma exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "It's a boy," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "We have a son." Lucas approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the red-faced infant in Emma's arms. "He's perfect," he whispered. "What should we name him?" They discussed names but never settled on one, wanting to wait until they met their child. Looking at his son's tiny features, Lucas suggested, "Thomas, after my father. Thomas Foster." "Thomas," Emma repeated, smiling. "Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, filled with sleepless nights and constant worry. Emma had never felt so incompetent at anything in her life, but Lucas was right there beside her, equally clueless and equally determined. They figured things out together, learning Thomas's cries and needs, marveling at every tiny milestone. Martha visited regularly, offering advice and practical help, and even Mr. Campbell's wife came by with gifts and experienced wisdom. As Thomas grew from a newborn to an infant with a distinct personality, Emma and Lucas grew into their roles as parents. Lucas proved surprisingly good with the baby, patient and gentle, singing old songs his mother had taught him. Emma discovered a fierce protective love she'd never known she was capable of, a love that made her understand her own mother better in retrospect. By Thomas's first birthday, the cabin had been expanded again to include a proper bedroom for Emma and Lucas, freeing up the original room as a larger space for Thomas. The garden had become Emma's pride and joy, producing enough vegetables that she could preserve some for winter and even trade surplus with neighbors for other goods. Lucas's horse training business was thriving, his reputation drawing clients from as far as San Antonio. They weren't rich by any means, but they were comfortable, secure, and happy. On a cool evening in October, sitting on their porch while Thomas played at their feet, Lucas took Emma's hand. "Do you remember what I said to you that first Sunday by the creek? About feeling like everything in my life had led me to you." "I remember," Emma said softly. "I feel that even more now. This life we've built, this family, it's everything I never knew I wanted. And it all started because I noticed a woman in an ill-fitting dress and thought she deserved better." He smiled at her. "Best decision I ever made, having those dresses made for you." Emma leaned against him, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I never owned a dress that fit until you came along. But you gave me so much more than dresses, Lucas. You gave me a home, a family, a life I'd stopped believing was possible. You saw me when I felt invisible, and you loved me before I knew how to love myself." "We saved each other," Lucas said simply, "and I'd do it again in a heartbeat." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, Thomas babbling happily between them, and Emma thought about the strange path that had brought her here. All the years of struggling and feeling like she didn't fit anywhere had led to this moment, to this life, to this love. The dresses Lucas had left on her doorstep had been more than just clothing. They'd been a message, a promise, an acknowledgement that she was worth something. They'd been the beginning of everything. 2 years later, Emma gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Lucas's mother. Then came another son, James, born just as the century turned in 1900. The cabin grew along with the family, becoming a proper house with multiple rooms and a wide porch where Emma grew herbs in pots. The garden expanded to include fruit trees that Lucas planted, their branches heavy with apples and peaches in season. Lucas's horse training operation had grown enough that he'd built a separate barn and corral, and he'd taken on an apprentice to help with the work. Emma had started selling her preserved vegetables and homemade jams at the general store in Eagle Pass, earning her own money that she saved for the children's future. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives, a beloved aunt to the children, even though she had no blood tie to them. On a warm spring day in 1902, Emma stood in her garden watching her 3 children play while Lucas worked with a young horse in the corral. Thomas, at 7, was showing his younger siblings how to catch lizards, his voice patient as he instructed them. Sarah, at 4, was more interested in the flowers than the lizards, picking dandelions and sticking them in her hair. James, not quite 2, toddled between his siblings, trying to keep up with both activities at once. Lucas finished with the horse and came to stand beside Emma, slipping his arm around her waist. They'd been married almost 8 years now, and Emma loved him more deeply than she had on their wedding day, their love having grown and matured with time and experience. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, seeing the contemplative expression on her face. "How far we've come," Emma said. "Sometimes I look at all this, at you and the children and our home, and I can barely remember the girl I used to be. The one who worked in Martha's saloon and wore clothes that didn't fit and thought she'd never have anything of her own. She's still in there," Lucas said gently. "That strength you had, that determination, it's what makes you such a wonderful mother and wife. You didn't lose her. You just gave her better circumstances to flourish in." Emma turned to face him, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. "I love you, Lucas Foster. I'll never stop being grateful that you looked at me that day and decided I was worth 3 dresses and a lifetime of love." "The gratitude goes both ways, Emma. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting. Before you, I was just drifting, never quite finding where I belonged. You were my home before we ever had this house." They stood together watching their children play as the afternoon sun warmed their shoulders, and Emma thought about how something as simple as a dress that fit had changed the entire trajectory of her life. Lucas had seen her when she felt invisible, had recognized her worth when she'd forgotten it herself. The 3 dresses he'd left on her doorstep hadn't just clothed her body. They'd clothed her in dignity, in possibility, in hope. They'd been a gift far more valuable than fabric and thread. They'd been the first step toward a life she'd never dared to dream of. As the years continued to unfold, Emma and Lucas's life together deepened and enriched in ways both expected and surprising. They faced hardships together, from drought years that challenged the garden to illnesses that swept through Eagle Pass and touched their own family. But they also experienced countless moments of joy, from Thomas's graduation from the local school, to Sarah's wedding to a kind young rancher, to James following in his father's footsteps with horses. Martha eventually retired from running the saloon, selling it to one of the other girls, and moving into a small house near Emma and Lucas. She spent her remaining years surrounded by the family she'd helped create, a beloved presence at every birthday and holiday. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 70, Emma wept for the woman who'd been the closest thing to a mother she'd had after losing her own. Lucas and Emma grew old together, their hair turning gray and their faces lining with the map of a life well lived. They never left the land Lucas had bought when they first married, though they expanded it over the years until it was a proper ranch that their children and grandchildren helped run. The original cabin remained standing, preserved and maintained as a reminder of where they'd started, of the simple beginning that had grown into something magnificent. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Emma wore the cream-colored dress with the embroidered flowers, the one she'd worn on her wedding day. It had been carefully preserved and still fit her, though her body had changed with age and childbearing. Lucas, looking at her across the room crowded with family, felt his heart swell with the same love he'd felt 40 years earlier. Later that night, when the celebration had ended and they were alone in their bedroom, Lucas pulled out a package Emma hadn't seen before. "I have something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling. "An anniversary present." Emma unwrapped it carefully to find fabric, beautiful cotton in a deep blue that reminded her of that first dress he'd had made for her all those years ago. "Lucas, what is this? Fabric for a new dress. I thought maybe you'd like one that fits the woman you are now, just like those first dresses fit the woman you were then. You can take it to the seamstress in town, have her make it however you like." He took her hands in his, the gesture as familiar as breathing after 40 years of marriage. "I know you don't need dresses from me anymore. You're not the struggling girl working at the saloon, but I wanted to give you one anyway, to remind you that I still see you the same way I did then. You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Emma Foster." Emma's eyes filled with tears, the happy kind that came from being deeply moved. "You're going to make me ruin this fabric with my crying. Cry all you want. We'll dry it out and it'll be fine." Lucas pulled her close and they stood in the embrace of 40 years of shared life, shared love, shared everything. "I'd do it all again, you know. Every single moment. Every struggle, every joy, all of it, as long as it meant I got to spend my life with you." "So would I," Emma whispered against his chest. "So would I." They'd built a legacy together, Emma and Lucas Foster, not just in the form of children and grandchildren, though there were plenty of those, not just in the ranch and the land, though those were substantial. Their real legacy was the love they'd created, the proof that two people who felt like they didn't fit anywhere could find a perfect fit with each other. Emma had never owned a dress that fit until Lucas had 3 made and left them on her doorstep. But what he'd really given her was a life that fit, a love that fit, a future that fit perfectly around the shape of who she was and who she wanted to become. In the end, that was worth more than all the dresses in the world, though Emma kept those original 3 carefully preserved in a trunk, bringing them out occasionally to remember where she'd started and marvel at where she'd ended up. The blue dress, the green dress, the cream dress with embroidered flowers. They were just fabric and thread, but they represented something precious. They represented the moment when someone looked at her and decided she deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. They represented the beginning of everything that mattered. And when Emma Foster passed away at the age of 76, surrounded by the family she and Lucas had created, those dresses were passed down to her granddaughters along with the story of how their grandfather had seen their grandmother working in a saloon, noticed her clothes didn't fit, and had 3 dresses made for her. How that simple act of kindness had sparked a love story that lasted a lifetime and created a family that would carry on for generations. Lucas followed his beloved Emma 2 years later, his heart finally giving out after 78 years of beating, most of them for her. In his final moments, holding the hand of his youngest granddaughter, he smiled and whispered, "Tell Emma I'm coming. Tell her I still remember that blue dress." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch. They'd built together, under a cottonwood tree that reminded people of the creek where they'd fallen in love. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, but also a line that Thomas had suggested. She'd never owned a dress that fit. He had 3 made. They built a life together. It was a simple story, really. A story about a cowboy who noticed a struggling woman and decided to do something kind. A story about a woman who'd felt invisible, learning to see herself through someone else's loving eyes. A story about how sometimes the smallest gestures can change everything, how a dress can be more than clothing, how love can grow from the simplest seeds. But it was also a grand story, an epic written in the quiet moments of everyday life, in shared meals and whispered conversations, in children raised and hardships overcome, in a love that never wavered even when everything else did. It was the story of Emma Wright, who became Emma Foster, who went from fitting nowhere to fitting perfectly in the arms of a cowboy who saw her worth before she could see it herself. And in the end, isn't that what every love story is about? Being seen, being valued, being chosen. Finding the person who looks at you and decides you're worth the effort, worth the commitment, worth a lifetime of love. Emma found that person in Lucas, and Lucas found that person in Emma, and together they created something that outlasted them both, a legacy of love that their descendants would carry forward long after the original dresses had crumbled to dust. The house still stands on that land in Texas, maintained by the Foster family that continues to ranch and train horses just as Lucas did. In the living room hangs a portrait of Emma and Lucas on their wedding day, young and hopeful and deeply in love. And in a climate-controlled display case, carefully preserved for over a century, are 3 dresses, one blue, one green, one cream with embroidered flowers. They're fragile now, the fabric delicate with age, but they remain as a testament to where it all began. Visitors sometimes ask about the dresses, and the current generation of Fosters tell the story they've heard passed down through the years. About a cowboy in 1883 who saw a woman who needed help and decided to be the help she needed. About how love can start with the simplest gesture and grow into something that lasts forever. About how everyone deserves to have something that fits them perfectly, whether that's a dress or a life or a love. And if the visitors listen carefully, on quiet evenings when the wind blows across the Texas plains, they might hear echoes of laughter from long ago, of children playing and lovers talking, and a life well lived together. The story of Emma and Lucas Foster lives on, not just in the preserved dresses or the family that bears their name, but in the very air of the place they made home, because some love stories don't end. They just transform, becoming legend and memory and inspiration for everyone who comes after. The story of a girl who never owned a dress that fit and the cowboy who had 3 made for her isn't just their story anymore. It belongs to everyone who's ever felt like they didn't fit, who's ever hoped for someone to see them truly, who's ever believed that love can change everything. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy of all.